Thank you, Cian Carla. Minister, I just want to begin by saying the comments and the criticisms and indeed potentially the frustration that I'm going to express here, not aimed personally, but rather collectively at both the government of today, the department and indeed the ideology that have left their system of education crumbling at the seams at this moment in time. I was interested in your opening address, which began with yesterday was a very difficult day for Leaving Cert 2020 students. I think you rectified it at the end when you acknowledged that actually it was the Leaving Cert 2020 have had an awful year as a whole. And I think it would be remiss of me if I actually didn't go through the timeline of what has been experienced by Leaving Cert students in 2020 to this point, just to encapsulate the full horrors that they've experienced. So schools closed on the 13th of March. On the 19th of March, the orals were cancelled, although they are due to take place a short time later on the 23rd of March and between the 23rd of March and the 3rd of April. On the 8th of May, the Leaving Cert was cancelled. That was due to start on June 3rd, replaced by a model including standardisation and historical data. On the 16th of July, an announcement that the results would come 3 weeks later than scheduled was made. On the 4th of September, the school historical data was removed. And on the 7th of September, the results, and then yesterday, the announcement that actually that has been a cock-up in the results also. Minister, I accept that mistakes can be made, but what massively frustrating for me and for probably other members of the opposition and other people who have been commentating and asking for these changes to be made and highlighting flaws and inadequacies in the system almost since March, was that at every one of those steps, at every one of those flaws that we highlighted, we were met by expressions of great confidence that everything will be okay on the day, both by yourself and by your predecessor. And only at the 11th hour, only constantly at the 11th hour, was an announcement made that things were going to change, that they were making an addition, that we were changing it now, that the commentary and the suggestions that were being made by opposition parties and leading experts in the field of education that were being made all the way through were now being acknowledged at the 11th hour consistently. That was grotesquely unfair to the students. I think it was unfair to the opposition, and it was left us almost at this point where the absence of parliamentary scrutiny possibly could have discovered some of the flaws that have been unravelled, that have been revealed today. And I think, for me, if that's what governance amounts in this country, where we just continually follow the script as given to us by the department and we show up, we cut ribbons and we get a small bit of pork barrel for our constituencies, then I think it's a flawed and unacceptable way, and in many ways it's rendered us in the situation that we're in at the minute. I do have some questions in relation to the Leaving Cert process, but before I do that, I do want to acknowledge that in our education system at the minute, some very, very dark clouds are gathering. I think we can all understand that. Colleague Gannon touched on them a minute ago, but I do not have the confidence that the department and the leadership that is there at the minute has the capacity or the ability to address the dark clouds that are gathering on a multitude of fronts, and I want to touch on them. Today, the Force Union announced that they showed up at the WRC today to engage in conversation and discussion in relation to skills secretaries, and they were met with basically blockages. There was a retrograde steps in terms of the relationship that had broken down.
Grades.
Union
issues have nothing to do with this.
That's why. But we're going to be here in 3 weeks discussing this. Can we not preempt the problem?
Let's be here.
But can we not preempt the problem? No, this is a problem in our Parliament at the minute. We raise problems, we're shut down, and then we come in and we get apologies.
Deputy, please.
It's ridiculous.
Please, I don't normally interrupt deputies. We need to focus on the subject matter before us. And union
the subject matter before us is education as a whole.
Sorry?
The subject matter we should be discussing is education as a whole.
Yeah, but that's
because
not what
we're going to have in the next couple of weeks.
Deputy, we're discussing calculated grades and the difficulties that have arisen.
And when we're discussing skills strikes in about 3 to 4 weeks,
we're not
like you to remember this moment.
We're not discussing.
You just remember this moment in a couple of weeks.
Sorry, Deputy, please. We're not. No, with respect. We're not discussing school strikes. We may have future discussions on school strikes, but that's not what we're discussing now.
When they happen, we'll have them. Okay.
Yeah, well,
and Humpty Dumpty falls off the wall, we'll all come running. Minister, in relation to I'm going to ask some questions. In relation to Polymetrica, what's your understanding of Polymetrica? Why did they get the role? I looked at them on LinkedIn today. I could find one employee. Please tell me it's not just one person who was in charge of this whole process. How many employees, for example, did Polymetrica have, and how did they get the contract?
Thank you, Deputy Gannon. Minister.
Thank you, Deputy. In relation to Polymetrica, as you were aware and as I inferenced earlier, when the decision was taken in April to postpone the Leaving Certificate examinations until July, that was followed rather quickly in May time, the 8th of May, when the then Minister made the decision to move towards calculated grades. And I should point out that at that point, prior to that, there had been contingency planning, as I have said earlier, in relation to what might happen if the Minister at that time did have to make the decision. And again, just to point out very importantly, in reference to previous points that you have made, and the difficulties and the issues around calculated grades and all of that, I would have to say to you that calculated grades certainly were introduced by the Minister on the 8th of May, but they were first mooted by students and further to engagement with representative bodies like teachers, principals, deputy principals, managerial bodies and indeed parents and student representatives. It was an agreed process to move forward with calculated grades, and I think it is very important to actually acknowledge that was the view at that time. It was the best view at that time, given that we were living in extraordinarily difficult times and a pathway was needed to move forward so that students, the class of 2020, would have a pathway to move forward in terms of further higher education or indeed whatever other pathway that they would want to choose. So I just think in the interest of balance it's very important to mention that. Just in relation to Polymetrica and its principal, Fernando Cartwright, are experts in what is a highly technical and specialised field in the area of statistics, psychometrics and educational testing. Polymetrica had worked in Ireland previously, and their expertise in the field of statistics and psychometrics, as I have said, is especially in high-stakes fields. Having initially been engaged in an advisory capacity with the technical working group, I understand, prior to April-May time, we'll say around there, and as part of the contingency planning for the 2020 Leaving Certificate, they were then engaged to implement and deliver the system when the decision was taken on the 8th of May to postpone the Leaving Certificate.
Minister, I want to ask in relation to, so in terms of software design, and I had to check with experts today, so some of these might be quite technical. Software design relies on 3 standardisation processes. Clarity of specification, so a formal sign-off for saying being the responsibility of the client, i.e. your department. Professional coding, in this case by a company that your department decided was the best in the business for this particular type of business. And very critically, quality user acceptance testings, after which the client, your department and nobody else approved the system. Minister, can you confirm the specification signed off by your department was explicit and clear as to the requirements and the date of this particular sign-off? Who within your department approved the sign-off and on what date and at which particular meeting? And will you be able to provide the minutes from that meeting in which the specifications were approved?
Minister.
Thank you, Deputy. Thank you, Cathaoirleach. It is my understanding that the then Minister signed off on the calculated grades process on the 8th of May. The exact time and date of the signing of a contract with Polymetrica is not available to me at this point in time. You will appreciate that was some considerable time ago, but indeed I will make every effort to furnish that to you should you require so, and I will ask my department to actually do that. In relation to the aspects that you have raised there, I'm not a statistician myself, nor indeed an expert in any aspect of psychometrics, but you have mentioned and referenced the notion of oversight and quality and validation and all of that. What I will say in terms of oversight, there was a series of mechanisms put in place. There was obviously the National Standardisation Group. There was the Independent Steering Committee chaired by Dr. Anya Lawler, formerly of the Teaching Council. There was the International External Reviewer, Dr. Janet Brown of the Scottish Qualifications Authority. And of course you had the Education Research Centre who were running a parallel system. And so through that system, validations and checks and all of that were taking place, and so all of that was put in place, and indeed documentation in relation to this is all available and has been made available on the website. And as I say, any further specific information you require, Deputy, I will ensure that my officials make it available to you. Thank you.